All right, good morning, and thank you for bearing with us as we figure out this new and exciting, never-ending COVID world with conferences. My name is Andre. I was here this morning, so I won't say anything more about that. Okay, launching in to today's panel discussion, which is really about hope and how what we see with food in cities. I'd like to just do a quick introduction to our speakers. Carolyn Steel, who will be joining us from London, is a London-based architect and academic and the author of the 2008 book, Hungry City, How Food Shapes Our Lives, which I can highly recommend, and the recently published Citopia, How Food Can Save the World. So rather appropriate for today's session. We also have with us, as we from this morning, Dr. Joshua Spodek. Dr. Spodek is a PhD in MBA and a 3-time TEDx speaker, #1 best-selling author of Initiative and Leadership Step by Step, host of the award-winning Leadership in the Environment podcast, and a professor at New York University. Then we have Dr. Brent Loken. Brent is the global food lead scientist for the World Wildlife Fund, based here in Stockholm, if I'm not mistaken. Brent, yeah, I think you are.
But I'm in Norway at the moment.
You're muted. Well, I'll keep reading anyway. And his research spans subjects of food and health to orangutans. As a lead author of the Eat Lancet report, which was launched, I believe, 2 years ago here in Stockholm, his current research focuses on translating global targets into action. We also have Ambassador Banashri Bose Harrison, who, after 3.5 decades as a diplomat, Banashri is still promoting cross-cultural understanding and insights into health and sustainability through exposing people to the wonders of Indian diets. And lastly, we have Matthias Dahlgren, who is not only well known in Sweden for his trailblazing cuisine, he's also celebrated globally for his revolutionary vision around and masterful execution of food. For Matthias, the future of haute cuisine lies in all things natural, the logical evolution of organic food. So, having now said that, oh, there we all are. Hi, Carolyn. Hi, Carolyn. I'd love to invite you to give a first, yes, I'm going to move back a bit, to give a little 4-minute introduction about what you'd like to, what you're thinking about and how it relates to the issue of food in cities.
I will certainly do that. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here and very nice to see you, Andre. It's a shame we can't go out for an eau de vie later, but there you go. At least we can do this. As you kindly said in your introduction, I wrote a book in 2008 called Hungry City. I'll flash up the first copy that I ever laid my hands on. And in that book, really what I was exploring was how cities are fed and what it takes to feed a city. And at the time, it struck me as kind of really weird that it was down to me to be asking this question, because I kept expecting there to be a huge section in the library all to do with this. And at that time, there really, really wasn't. And I think it's a subject that's just grown and grown, particularly, of course, because I began working on this in the year 2000, and 20 years later, of course, the world's become predominantly urban with all that that means. Actually, at the end of that book, so I'm coming to food from the perspective of an architect, I think is the important thing to say. And at the end of that book, I invented a word called Citopia, which indeed is the title of my more recent book, which I'm also going to flash up here with my high-tech process. And the reason is I want to explain why I invented this word and what it means. It comes from the Greek word sitos for food and topos for place. Now, the basic idea behind this is that we live in a world shaped by food. Some of us only have to look down to know that if we struggle to do our trousers up, but also, you know, our bodies, our brains, our habits, our landscapes, our politics, our economics, our cities are all shaped by food. So food is like this sort of éminence grise that's kind of, you know, everywhere, but I often say it's too big to see. And in a sense, the reason I sort of resorted to a Greek word is because for me, food is the greatest practical alternative that we have to thinking about the way we should live in a multidisciplinary, connected way that actually exists. So it's an alternative to utopia, which, as you probably know, means either an ideal place or no place. In other words, it can't exist. So through food, and again, this is the 3-minute version, you know, because food shapes everything, and because we all eat every day, and because it's real and material, and by definition, political and economic and all the rest of it, we can actually use food together as a practical, real tool for reshaping the world, and critically to rethinking what is a good life. And that's really what my new book is about. We need a new vision of a good life. The old vision about, I'm often calling it being on a hamster wheel and buying lots of handbags, is kind of so 20th century. And food has to be revaluing food. I mean, the fact that we've created this thing called cheap food that doesn't exist is a big part of our problem. So to revalue food, to understand it's the most important, most valuable thing in our lives, and then rebuild our lives around it is the big idea.
Thank you. Thanks, Carolyn.
Okay.
Really appreciate that. Reintroduce the subsequent speakers so that there's no confusion. Our next speaker is Dr. Spodek, as I mentioned earlier, and as you probably no doubt know by heart, he is a 3-time TEDx speaker, #1 best-selling author of the Initiative and Leadership Step by Step, and host of the Leadership and Environment podcast, and professor at NYU, and a rather well-disciplined and vigorous crusader against waste and reimagining how we want to live. So please take it away, Joshua.
Glad to see everyone. And just to make sure the sound's coming through.
Yep, it is. And
great. So as you heard, up until 5, 6, 7 years ago, I went to business school and I learned classes in leadership, and I didn't really think that you could learn to lead. And I learned that you could, and that was very interesting to me. And so up until 5 or 6 years ago, I was teaching leadership, I was coaching it, and almost accidentally, something I did not expect this to be something professional. You know, I was reading the paper and seeing that the environment there were a lot of critical issues. And one of the big ones was a lot of plastic pollution, a lot of pollution of all sorts. And one day I was in my kitchen, and I looked down and I saw how much garbage I was producing and how much of it came from, well, at the time I thought food, but people who saw me speak earlier, it was coming from doof. And I thought, a lot of people say, you know, government should do things, corporations should do things, and I agree. But this stuff I was responsible for myself. And I gave myself a challenge. Could I go for 1 week buying no packaged food? At the time, I thought this would be absolutely impossible. I thought this is where I get my food variety from. I didn't cook very much myself. I ate out most of the time. And actually, I did what school taught me, which was I analyzed and planned and thought, what will I do day 1? What will I do day 3, day 2, day 3? And actually 6 months went by before I actually just said, let me just give it a shot and just start right now. I'm not going to die if I go for a week without buying any packaged food. I made it 2.5 weeks. And it was an amazing experience because in that time, it was the first time, for example, that I cooked beans from scratch on the stove. And that led me to cook beans in a pressure cooker. And it dramatically transformed my relationship with food. But the bigger thing was that not just that my food became cheaper, more convenient, more accessible for people who live in food deserts and things like that, that it became, my expectation was, this is going to be hard. This is going to be a burden. This is going to be a chore. And the reverse happened. I mean, what was hard was not knowing how to cook. But once I learned, it opened things wide open. And so now when I go to the farmer's market, it is like, I'm like a kid in a candy store, except it's all healthy. And I've gotten to know my farmers. I take a trip once a year to visit the farm. I go generally to the same farm stands at the farmer's market, so I get to know them. And they give me extra vegetables, so it's like even cheaper. And that mindset, I didn't see. I mean, in other ways, I took that expectation that even though it looks like a burden and a chore, if I act on my sustainability values, when you act on your values, it makes your life better. And that happened for me. So that later, when I learned about how much pollution flying caused, I took on a challenge to see if I could go for a year without flying. And that also gave the same result of, I thought it was going to be horrible. I thought it was going to be impossible. I thought I wouldn't be able to do it. And it ended up being such a great year that I decided to go for a second year, then a third year, then a fourth, and I'm now in my 5th year of not flying. And again, this mindset shift was something that I did not see anywhere else in the world. And so I took what I knew from leadership and applied it to sustainability and said, there's no Mandela of the environment. There's no one who's saying, this is something you're going to enjoy. Almost all the message that I get on acting sustainability is about acting sustainably says you don't really want to do this, but you have to. And that has not been my experience. So I started my podcast to bring leaders on, to walk them through, to have an experience, sharing their environmental values, acting on them, so that people listening can feel it's not just me, other people are doing this. And it's what Carolyn got to at the end. We don't have stories, images, and I want to create stories, images, beliefs, work with people's emotions, not just telling people what to do. So I don't want to say we shouldn't be managing, but also to add leadership. So I could go on. I hope that's a good background.
Fabulous, Tracy. Thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. Brent Loken. Dr. Loken is the Global Food Lead Scientist at the WWF and co-author of the Eat Lancet report. Dr. Loken, please invite you to share with us some thoughts.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you to all the speakers here. I love the word Sitopia and this idea that food can help us. It's the center of one of the most important things that we hold dear. So that's a really great way of like starting this session. And, you know, when we think about all of us sitting here and why we're here, I think we're all here because obviously we want to make the world a better place. You know, and when we ask ourselves this question, I think sometimes we struggle with exactly what we can do. You know, what is it that I as an individual can do that will have a huge impact? You know, is it stopping flying or is it something else? I hear about climate change. Should I change my car? You know, what can me as one small little individual do to have a huge impact? You know, and I used to work in Indonesia and I worked with orangutans, and people would also, I mean, they'd ask me many times, what can they do to save the rainforest? And I really struggled with an answer. You know, especially if they sat a long ways away in terms of the personal connection that they could have. But this is a great thing about food, because it's one of the single most powerful levers that we have to actually create change. And, you know, as each one of us are thinking about what we can do to make the world a better place, food is one of those things that we can actually turn to. And the power, it actually gives us power. It empowers us to create change every single day. And that's why I shifted to work on food. And that's why I just love the topic. You know, we all love talking about food, you know. So what do we know about food? I'm sure you've heard these facts. Food is a leading cause of death globally right now today. It's having a huge impact on our health. It is the leading user of water, you know, fresh water use. Leading cause of biodiversity loss. One of the leading causes of also climate change. You know, we know that food is front and center of all these things. But if we shift and change what we eat, we can actually solve all these problems. If we don't shift and change what we eat, we're not going to be able to solve all of these problems. But when we're talking about solving the issues of food, one of the things that I found is that there's also so many misconceptions about it. We all think we're experts because we eat it. And therefore, we have a lot of misconceptions that we tend to point to, or a lot of panaceas that we want to cling to in terms of this is the one thing that's going to solve the problems. But if we don't have a better understanding of some of the misconceptions or debunking some of these panaceas, by solving the problem or by shifting towards one action, it actually could make the matter worse. So I think it's very important, and I hope that we can explore some of those during the session. You know, some of these things that I think each one of us struggle with in terms of questions is, what is healthy food? There's so many diets out there. Which one is actually healthy? How much red meat can I actually eat? What is sustainable food? Is local food sustainable or unsustainable? How about organic food? Is that good or bad? Can I get enough daily protein from only eating plants? People tell me I can't, and I have to have red meat at the center of the plate. You know, is it actually, when you walk into a store, you might look at that avocado and think, should I buy that avocado from Chile or not? So being able to really have that honest discussion about what is healthy, what is sustainable, I think is extremely important as we tackle what I think is the single most problem facing us. Another thing about food is just so many inequalities, and COVID has highlighted that once again. Some people have too much food and some people don't have enough. I think it's a complete travesty today that in the 21st century, there's still 700 million people that don't have enough food to eat. And we've made huge strides when we're looking at hunger, but there's still way too many people that go to bed hungry. And in this day and age, the fact that some people have too much and some people don't have enough is something that we can solve. And that's something that we also have to look at. So truly the power is on our plate. It's we have that choice every single time that we eat. And I very much look forward to all of you, not only learning from you, but also discussing some of these issues. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Loken. Our next speaker is Ambassador Bose Harrison, whom I mentioned is a retired diplomat who served for 3.5 decades, but is really still an ambassador by bringing the insights and joys of the Indian diets to other people's understanding. So please, Ambassador Harrison, the floor is yours.
Let me greet you the Indian way. Namaste. I bow to you. And I think that does represent India's participation in this event. I do not speak anymore for Government of India, but we would all really like to learn from what is happening around the world, because food and everything related to it matters, pardon my unparliamentary language, hell of a lot more for India. We have 1/5 of the world's consumers, and what we eat, how we eat it, how we produce it will not affect only India, it will affect the whole world. So this is something which is the reason why, after retiring from diplomacy, I followed my interest in Indian gastronomy, but then caught up in this whole network of what food is all about. Because you start off by thinking, okay, how do I present the great rich heritage of Indian gastronomy to the world? And then you get into all these other questions of how sustainable Indian food traditionally is. The only cuisine, I think, which actually medical knowledge of Ayurveda for certain types of its food. But on the other hand, you get involved with the challenges for producers, challenges for consumers, and all of that. So that is what really drew me from my diplomacy into becoming a champion of Indian gastronomy, but also a crusader, I would say, for smart food systems. And that's where, while I love Johan, I wish this theme had been not good food city, but smart food city, because good is not always smart, but smart always has to be good. And with urbanization proceeding apace in India, with almost 50% of the population expecting to be living in cities in 2025, the challenges that India already faces in this field are becoming more and more severe, and demonstrated by the human tragedy that we all saw happening during the migration of workers back to their homes during the COVID pandemic. That only illustrated the vulnerability of the food systems that are currently there. But fortunately, the leadership in the government, I know that individual is very, very important, but having a supporting environment in the government both encourages and draws in the individual and also supports and facilitates them. So fortunately, the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India, which hosted you, Dr. Brent Loken, for the launch of the Eat Lancet report in India, has understood the importance and has been focusing on the concept of smart food cities since 2017. One can only wish that it had happened even earlier, but better late than never. Now, what is a smart food city is what we all are here gathered to discuss and to see how we can learn from each other's insights and experiences. But what is a smart food city? this is something that an initiative that I've been involved with called Tasting India Symposium, which is going to be participating, I think, in this event also, has been focusing on to bring together, it's so important to bring together different players from different sections of life. You need to involve government, you need to involve consumers, you need to involve producers, you need to involve restaurateurs. I mean, who is not connected to food and who is not affected by food? So Tasting India Symposium worked with the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India and did a seminar, a symposium on smart food cities, a blueprint, in December 2019, where many persons of international experience also participated. So the 4 pillars, no, actually 5 pillars that I would say, and I would like to hear your opinions on, which I humbly feel are critical for a smart food city. One remains the question of safety and hygiene. Perhaps not so much in developed countries, but in India, it is a huge issue that we need to focus on, and we need to have the institutions, we need to have the physical infrastructure, we need to have the training. All of that goes into ensuring food hygiene and safety. Then we come to quality, doof rather than food, as Joshua mentioned. That is what we need to bring to people's attention, that what you eat is what makes you, what affects your health, affects the planet's health. Now, how do you set about this? How do you get people to think about what they eat? And you may remember, Dr. Loken, I talked about the 2 Ps, the purse and the palate. You have to think of what does the food mean to the purse of the person who's going to be buying it, and how palatable it is. It may be really wonderful for their health, but if it costs a lot, no, half the Indians won't be able to buy it. So the second pillar is going to be food quality. You need to have a setup which ensures food quality. Then you, have I run out of time?
Yeah, well, so we're going to have about 20 to 25 minutes to discuss this.
Okay, give me 2 minutes to conclude. Not even 2 minutes, 1 minute to conclude.
If you could just go through the 5 pillars, and then we can discuss.
Yeah, sure.
Just say what
sure.
they are. We have safety,
okay.
We have quality.
Okay, the third is waste management and waste recycling of food.
Yep.
The fourth is use of green technology wherever possible in the food chain.
Yep.
And last but not the least, social and behavioral change, which must affect every single stakeholder. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That's really good to have those that structure, so that'll help foment, I think, the conversation. Our last introductory remarks will be by Matthias Dahlgren, who's sitting in the flesh here opposite me. So I'm going to actually turn a little bit to face you, Matthias. Sorry for the folks on screen. I won't be looking digitally in your eyes, as it were. Matthias is a local hero, especially to foodies. And besides being a trailblazer in Sweden when he launched Banashri many moons ago, was the first, I believe, person from Scandinavia to win first prize at the coveted Bocuse d'Or competition in '97.
I wasn't the first, but one of the first.
To win first place?
Yeah.
Okay, well, one of the first is humble, so very good ambassador for Sweden, but also launched Matbaden and Matsalen at the Grand Hotel, which, if you might say, were the manifestations of and representations of the new Nordic manifesto and Nordic food movement, upon which you've left an indelible personal imprint, and also spun out many other chefs and foodies in your wake. So it's great to have you, and we'd love to hear some of your thoughts on what a good food city is.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to start with thank you for having me, and hello to all the other speakers. I think I read in the paper yesterday here that in Sweden, 1/3 of all food that we carry home, we throw away. And of course, that's a huge problem, but why do we throw away 1/3 of the food? I think that one of the biggest questions actually for finding a sustainable way in the future is to educate people how to take care of food and how to cook. It's very few items in life that you get so little education and you should just fix it. And if we look back, so I think that back in the history, people had a lot of knowledge of taking care of simple things and do good things out of them. And that knowledge has gone lost a little bit. And I think that is one of the key things that we have to solve if we should find a way for for a healthier planet, actually. And you can also see in this like non-waste thinking and solutions that many people talk about today, at least what I see, many of the things is also a little bit absurd, because you can get you can get very good media on if you like dumpster a container in the city with like a flash lamp at night, even if you can afford food. But if you dumpster into your own fridge and don't tell anybody, you don't get any media on it. So it's like there are, I think we could, with quite some simple things, we could do really good. But it's also difficult to do good if you don't know how to do good, because many people are cooking and they don't have the knowledge how to take care of the resources. I think that's a problem. I'm a very positive person to innovation and to good food. But what I can see is really interesting that so many people today find that as a solution for the problems of the planet. But at the same time, it is a little bit strange, because many of the things that come up, that I taste a lot of new innovations and I love to try them, but many of the innovations is not tasty. And many of the innovations don't have any food culture behind them. And I think that makes them a little bit dead, at least to me. And I think also if they are dead to me as love food, I think that they can also become dead to other people who are a little bit less interested in food than I am. And it's like if you look at, for instance, if you go in on Netflix and you watch on the history of the taco, and you can watch like episode after episode, and it's about people, it's about passion, it's about human pattern, it's about history, it's about it's food culture, and it's about humans. And then it becomes interesting. I think with many of these like new innovation things, we don't have to forget that it's about humans and nature. And I think it's easy to get a little bit lost in the innovation process, that everything becomes just super smart and it don't involves the people. And that is, I think, that could be a little bit the problem for the innovation process.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, that's great introductions by all. Thank you very much. I'll look back at you there. Matthias, I'm also looking at you when I'm looking at the camera. I just have to pretend you're in the camera.
Okay.
So don't take it personally. So now the discussion begins. So we've had a number of framings for sort of the aspects of the challenges. So we've heard about the macro environmental challenge from Dr. Loken. We've heard about aspects of the duality challenge from Carolyn when it comes to the notion of city and how we live in cities and agriculture and place. We've heard about from Ambassador Harrison. We've heard about we need really to think about 5 pillars for reimagining our food system that must be addressed. Otherwise, you end up failing. Some of which touch on, I think, Matthias's idea and Dr. Spodek's idea around, well, really, what is food? And so there's sort of in a way, a value chain that needs to be exposed, and the linkages must perhaps be more fully understood. And I think we have a great panel for that. So if the real question, I suppose, is maybe Dr. Loken, you touched a little bit on some of the harrowing details around what's really undergirding our supply chain. Do you want to of hope how to imagine the good or smart food city with respect to those?
Yeah, so how to imagine the smart food city. Yeah, I don't want to get caught up in the harrowing details about how bad food is. I think we all know it. We all know what the problems are. So let's stop talking the problems and let's actually start working about solutions. And, you know, one of the biggest things that we have to do, though, for thinking about a solution is we have to start actually talking about food as being one of the solutions. And, you know, we tend to talk about other areas with food. We tend to talk about food loss and waste, which is an extremely important topic. We tend to talk about changes in how we actually produce food, but we tend to leave dietary shifts off the table when we talk about it because it's so controversial that nobody really wants to pick it up. You know, reducing food loss and waste is less controversial because we all agree that it's a big issue that needs to happen. Changing how we produce food is less controversial because we all agree that it has to happen, you know. So, but dietary shifts is something that we have to start tackling head on. And until we do that, we're not going to be able to design the smart food cities. Because what we need to do, any smart food cities that we have has to be able to address those three things. Tackle food loss and waste, change how we produce food and where we get it from, and shift diets. And if we don't do those three things, then doing just one or two of those won't actually solve the problem. So I would say that's probably one of the most important things. You know, very quickly is, you know, a couple other things is we can't always rely on the individual to like solve these problems for us. We want to say, okay, it's about educating the individual, it's about giving them the information and they're going to make the choice, but that's not holding the politicians accountable for the work that they have to do. And all of this responsibility should not fall on our shoulders as the individual. We need both the bottom up and we need the top down to happen at the same time. We need politicians to set the regulations in place that enable the individual to do what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, that's very helpful. So in light of what you've just said, I guess I'd ask, well, I'd point out something I forgot about Matthias, which is that he actually closed Matsalen about 3 years ago, which was his 2 Michelin star restaurant, much to the horror of the local food scene, but opened up in its place Rutabaga, a 100% vegetarian restaurant. So that's maybe a perfect time to ask, what was your experience, Matthias, or what are your reflections on the market and on your customers' initial response to the idea and their subsequent attitudes and perhaps even your team's learning curve and thoughts on the potential for expansion and enriching the space of shifting our diet?
I mean, first of all, for me and my team, it wasn't such a big change because we are professional people who loves to cook food and have a lot of knowledge in it. I think the biggest change was actually for the guests and the media, because we made such a big change. And but I have experienced that in my life before. Most of the places I've been opening has always been a little bit in the future, and it's very much about timing. Rutabaga was, I would say, timing-wise, it was maybe 9 months or 1 year too early. So we had a little bit tough time in the beginning to actually convince people that normally say that they love to eat green food, don't necessarily love it as much as they say. But what I find interesting, and the whole thing of why we actually did it, was that we wanted a new challenge. We have been doing this like a 2 Michelin star restaurant for 10 years, and I asked my team, it's like, we've been doing this for 10 years and we need some new energy into the team and the group. And I mean, for us, it's important to also learn new things. And what would be the absolute most challenging thing to do? It must be to do a vegetarian restaurant. I mean, for people who have high expectations, and I think we're right actually. But after now, I've been open for more than 3 years, and the wind has changed. And what we see today is that from the beginning, it was like, I would say, 90% of the people who came to eat in the restaurant was 100% vegetarian or vegan people. Today, we have still vegans and vegetarians that come and eat, but it's a lot of people who come and eat in our restaurants who eat everything, but some days in life you just want to eat good green food. It's like you don't have to be Italian to love pizza.
Yeah.
So you can sometimes you want some good green food, and I think that's it feels good. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, Dr. Harrison, I'm very aware of the fact that there are maybe at least tens of millions of vegetarians in India. So I want to state that as an obvious thing for myself, but and so it'll be interesting to look at the smart food city context in the Indian context. We already have addressed some of the sourcing questions, but before we do that, I just want to see if Carolyn and Josh, if you have any thoughts about might be missing when it comes to even when we shift what we eat from perhaps a meat-heavy and resource-heavy diet stream to a more plant-based. What are some of the blind spots we may have when it comes to nutrient recycling or shipping and handling and packaging and the like? And I don't know if Carolyn, you want to go first, since I know you've been doing this on a macro basis, and then maybe Josh, you can add in. Oh, we don't hear you, and my lip reading is terrible. Someone's muted you.
How's that?
There we go. There's the voice I wanted to hear.
Okay, fantastic. I quite enjoyed the idea of just doing it with hands and gestures. But anyway, I'm actually going to leave the kind of specific question you just asked to Josh, because I think he's got much more hands-on experience of it. What I really want to do is build on what Matthias has said and what Brent has said. Well, indeed, what Ambassador Harrison has said as well, about the fact that this is not about food. This is about life. And one of the things that I think we've really lost sight of is the fact that, I mean, I hate this question, how are we going to feed the world? I mean, it's just such an awful question on every level. A, who is we? B, who is the world who's going to get fed? And the whole mindset that lies behind it is all to do with, kind of only big ag can do this, and it's got to be big, and it's got to be this, and it's got to be that. And it's just rubbish. Okay, so that's thing one. Thing two is, as I said at the end of my introduction, we're stuck with this weird, old-fashioned idea of a good life from a previous era, which is all about more consumption, more this, more that, bigger, better, blah, blah, blah. It's over. And we have to go now with the things that give us pleasure. And this is, again, what Joshua was talking about directly, that don't cost the earth. And food is absolutely central to this. And I think it's been really, really interesting under lockdown. I know it's been happening in Europe, and I'm sure it's been happening in other parts of the world. People have kind of gone, hey, do you know what? It's actually quite nice not spending 4 hours a day on a sardine can going into a city. It's actually quite nice being at home, spending time with my kids, taking time to, grow some food, bake some bread. I know this is a sort of a kind of middle class vision because you have to have the home and the money for the bread, etc. But I think, there are so many things that we can get pleasure from. I mean, Epicurus, I mean, it's amazing how, you go back to the ancient Greeks, actually, and it's all there. So Epicurus said, the key to a good life is to get pleasure out of the necessary. And we all have to eat. So it's really, really weird that we've evolved this idea that we're too busy to cook, we're too busy to eat. As Matthias said, it all tastes, protein out of the sky, great, but who wants to eat this stuff, I mean, the need to eat is also the greatest source of pleasure and joy in our lives. And, so we can put these two things together. And it's the one thing, by the way, also that we have to consume every day, which is also beautiful. So if we're moving towards a zero carbon future, why are we not focusing on taking pleasure and joy and value in the one thing that just brings us together? I mean, again, as Matthias said, food is at the nexus between our two most important sets of relationships. One is with each other. I mean, we evolved as a species through the common problem of how to eat. The shared meal is the best and frankly only economy that we've ever invented that actually works. We're really good at sharing through food. but it also connects us to nature. So it's at the key of everything. So I just want to say it's not about food, it's about life. But it, you know, food is absolutely the lens through which we can ask all the important questions. And if we value it, then we will lead a good life.
Okay, fantastic. So that's a lead in, I think, to Josh and Banashri. I was going to ask Josh first, because I think, Banashri, you've got a fabulous scope to kind of help tie this together. If food is about life, and you've been demonstrating that one can lead a very rich and meaningful life with less impact, what are your thoughts on what else might need to be regrown in a lighter impact, especially when it comes to the food that we're sourcing and how we're doing it? Life choice or lifestyle. How do you see yourself acting in the future once now that you've throwing things in the can, as it were?
Me to Dr. Harrison.
Oh, that was to you. That was to you. For Dr. Harrison, I've got a whole slew of questions.
Okay. A lot of people look at the things that I do and they say, what you do sounds great, but you're just one person, and really, what difference does that make? And really, what one person does divided by 7.8 billion really doesn't add up to much. It rounds off to zero. I think that's a mistake of understanding the purpose of doing things. I have a friend whose wife is an opera singer, and he says that after she performs, every single time someone comes up from the audience and says to her, you did this thing, but here's a different way of doing it. You should try to do it. And they give her advice. And they're often people who have never done the thing. There's some things that if you haven't done it, you just don't know what you're talking about. And when I do things, I'm learning what I'm doing in order to be able to eventually help others, but to know what I'm talking about. And if you want to play Carnegie Hall stage, you got to play a lot of scales. And when I'm doing this is to learn the scales. As it turns out, I pick up garbage every day. I meet a person from a group who they're looking for things to do more sustainable. And I know other people, there's a deal that's going down right now. I can't really talk about it in detail, but because I've done these things, I know the people who are also doing these things, because we talk about these things together. And I know the challenges, the frustrations. It's not simply just tell someone to do this and they'll do it. It's hard, some of these things. It's hard to shift over. I had another friend of mine started this set of urban gardens connected with the school. And the students from the school, this is up in Harlem, they helped build the planters. And he said, all right, we built the planters, we have the soil. Here's some seeds to make chard. And so all the kids got some seeds, and they put the seeds in the dirt, and they covered it up, and they put the water in. And the kids look at him and say, okay, where's the chard? And he goes, well, it has to grow. It takes a little while. So a month later, the chard has grown, and he gives the kids the chard, and he says, take it home and eat it and tell me how it is. So the next day the kids come in and he says, how is the chard? And they go, our moms threw it out. I said, what are you talking about? They didn't know what to do. We've lost at least one generation does not know what to do with chard, even if they had it. And so you could say, well, they're in a food desert. How can they get this stuff? But if they're not going to buy it, if they don't know what to do with it, they're not going to buy it. So when I go up to farmers markets up in food deserts, I see people coming and going from the places serving doof, plenty, McDonald's and Dunkin' Donuts and stuff like that. And the fresh vegetables are just sitting there and no one's buying them. And so how do we get there? The last talk that I gave before the pandemic was I brought my pressure cooker up to the Bronx, and I gave a food demonstration as to how to cook how you could do this in a food desert. And they said, well, the first person said, we can't do this because we don't have the stuff up here that you do down there in Manhattan. But the next person said, actually, I know where you can get this. And the next person said, I know where you can get that. It was this education, it was a bit of demonstration, a bit of building community. But we have how to get there so that people like every step of the way, I think is very important. That's one of the things I try to work on.
So it sounds like I hear a strong echo from between you and Carolyn and Matthias around this issue that in order to, we need to be able to fill out the plates of our mind with knowledge and appreciation and a love for what's possible in order to actually create the demand and the facility to make better choices. and now that it's really interesting because I think, you know, all of us come from sort of the, you know, Sweden or England or the US, highly industrialized with respect to food backgrounds, cultures, with respect to the number of calories that move through our societies. And that, of course, points to some of the nature of some of the problems we have. Now, Ambassador, this is the fun part. You coming from India, where I don't know the number, but I'm guessing, is it about half the population? Is it what, 350 million people in India are living in farming communities, I'm guessing? That's about right. So now this is interesting because the notion of, you know, I'm assuming a lot of much of the packaging waste is gone because food shopping and preparing is much more proximate to where you live. The culture of the diversity of what's on offer, I would presume, is much richer than it might be in, say, Nebraska supermarket. And yet, as you point out, there are still major challenges. You mentioned the 5 pillars, so I invite you to perhaps elaborate on what's perhaps missing or different from what you see in this enormously scaled, complex experience in India, and how the Indian diet may need to be tweaked to make things really smart, and how you see it informing our discussion. Please. And I think you're on mute for reasons you may be on mute still. Can you? Not yet. Yep, soon. We can see you, which is fantastic, but we want more. No, still we don't hear you. Does anyone know how this program works? Oh.
Okay.
There we go. Fantastic. Thank you.
So basically, I think the real challenge in India is that the economy is growing. As a result, eating habits of people will change. And though, you know, in terms of statistics, per capita meat consumption in India is actually decreasing because that's calculated not on the basis of actual consumption. Take the total meat production and divide by the population. So if population is increasing fast, that figure comes down. But in real terms, the number of people who say that they are not strictly vegetarian, and you must understand that in India, there's not just one concept of vegetarianism. There are multiple concepts of vegetarianism. And, you know, there'll be people who will be vegetarian on one day of the week, or they will eat eggs, but they will, you know, whatever. But the number of people who are actually changing from completely vegetarian to non-vegetarian is actually increasing. Now, that in itself is not a matter of worry, so long as what they are eating is smart and good. And I come back to the point that has really hit me in my few years of now being involved in this movement, is how important it is to educate the individual, yes. And in India, perhaps education that is required to appreciate the benefits of vegetarianism may be less, because many of us have grown up used to it, and also between us, our vegetarian food is very, very delicious. So you don't have that challenge of, you know, making people want to eat vegetarian. But you have to really educate the people where the role of the government is important, but also the role of others in the food industry. I particularly highlight the importance of the role that chefs can play in this. And one initiative which has been, 2 initiatives that I'd like to briefly mention actually in this context, which I think will help move us closer to the realization of smart food cities. One is an initiative that came out of Tasting India Symposium called the Young Chefs Forum for Sustainable India, where young chefs started to promote local food. They started to promote an ingredient of the month as the focus element for their menus and so on. And the other really brilliant initiative that Food Safety and Standards Authority of India is working on is something called Eat Right India. It has made it one of the finalists for Rockefeller Foundation's food policy vision prizes for this year. And what they are doing is really doing a multi-stakeholder partnership and taking it to the city level, district level, and trying to engage from individual, from the citizen upwards and downwards and laterally, to make the importance of good and smart food acceptable to everyone.
Fantastic, thank you. We're gonna, I think we're being budgeted about 5 more minutes past our scheduled time. So I would just, if anyone has any thoughts you spontaneously want to contribute. Matthias has his hand up. We can just jump in because I think a conversation is what's needed. So Matthias, would you like to start?
No, I found it interesting when I listened to the last speaker about this with education, because where do we educate people about food? If you go back, let's say 100 years ago, everybody learned from your mother at home. Today, you don't learn from your mother at home because your mother maybe don't cook so much because she's working a lot if you live in a city. And you can also, everybody say today that, not everybody, but all of us here think that food is very important, but we can also see that food has been like not valued so high in the historically, because food isn't even an item in school. It's like if food and environment is such an important thing, I think we have to educate people in school so everybody get to learn about it. It's so important, I think.
Good point. Thank you. Who else would like to jump in? Yeah, please, Carolyn, and then Brent. So you're on mute again. So I'm lip reading again, Carolyn.
We will learn eventually with our mics and with food. You know, what we've all been talking about, I think, is the fact that probably less so in India, but certainly in the industrialized, you know, super industrialized, post-industrialized world, we've completely lost the connection with food culture. You know, as Matthias was just saying, you that used to learn from your family. As Brent was saying, politicians used to actually feed people. That was their most important job. They hated it, by the way, and French kings got their heads chopped off when they got it wrong. But it's the responsibility of society to, again, put food at the center. And I think all of these initiatives, I thought it was so interesting as well what Ambassador Harrison was just saying about chefs taking the lead and sort of saying, you know, this is why food matters and this is why you should care about food. It's trying to rebuild what we all used to know, which is that food is at the center of life and at the center of culture. And so it's very interesting to me that this is essentially, I think, the common theme of today's conversation. You know, the reason why it's called a good food city or a smart food city is because when you live in a city, very often you lose your contact with where the food actually comes from, which of course is the countryside, which is a conversation we haven't had a chance to talk about today. But I think the word culture is really important, and that is where sociability, pleasure, sharing, and indeed politics and economics all stem from. So the good society is one where we all sit around a table and share good food together. That is my metaphor for good society.
Thank you. And Brent, I know you had you wanted to mention something too.
Yeah, I just want to, you know, just once again say, maybe I have less faith in the individual, that the individuals are going to make the right choices. And, you know, the power is on our plate, and, you know, food is life, and we need to be thinking about it this way. But we also need to realize that we've got limited time to solve this problem. And I would say if we had, you know, centuries or multiple decades to solve this, then maybe we can do a more sustainable approach and go through education and really rely upon the individuals and families and bring up food cultures, but we don't. And, you know, that's where I think the politicians need to step in. You know, when somebody walks into a supermarket and healthy food is cheaper than junk food, they will buy healthy food. It'll be driven by economic choices. When they walk into like a supermarket and they have a multitude of choice of healthy food, they will buy healthy food you know, and that's just what it is. When we stop marketing junk food to like kids, they will stop buying it. And that all has to be driven from the top. And we have to keep on pushing for that and not necessarily rely that the individual will solve this problem for us.
Well, one of the things that none of us as individuals seem to be able to solve is the lack of time, and would that we had more. For the viewers, I do invite you all to investigate our panelists' work. They've all been doing incredible work, which is available both in printed format and online. And having done so already, I can say you'll find it to be endlessly informative and enjoyable. And Johan will make all of those links available to you on the website, won't you, Johan?
Of course I will do that.
Then I will say,
thank you so much.
Thank
if
you
there's anything I can add to this panel, it might be the links, actually, because beyond that, I'm not capable at all. Thank you so much, present panelists and cyberspace panelists out there. And it's only up to me to say thank you for a magic conversation and invite you to a non-doof lunch cooked by the magic chefs Ulrika Brydling and Sara Begner, and it's a zero waste lunch. Please do enjoy it, and see you all back at 2:00 p.m. CT.
Thanks, everybody.